Emily didn't know where they were going when Mark told her to pack light and trust him. That alone made her nervous, but it also stirred a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Mark had been distant for months, kind but distracted, present but far away. Emily watched the road blur past and wondered what version of them would arrive at the end of it. Mark kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near her knee, not quite touching. The space between them felt small and large at the same time. When the road curved and the ocean appeared, Emily gasped. The water stretched wide and calm, silver blue under the sky. A coastal town sat just beyond the cliffs, neat and welcoming. For a moment, everything else faded. The missed dinners, the short replies, the nights spent facing opposite walls, all of it loosened its grip. "You did this?" Emily asked. Mark smiled, proud and relieved. "I wanted it to be special." She stepped out of the car and breathed. In the salty air, it felt like a promise. She imagined long walks, quiet talks, and the space to remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. She imagined laughter that wasn't forced in silence that didn't hurt. Then another car pulled in at first. Emily thought it was just another couple arriving at the small lot near the beach house. Then she heard laughter, loud, familiar laughter. Ryan's voice carried easily, followed by Claire's bright laugh. A third voice joined them, relaxed and playful. Daniel, Emily's chest tightened before her mind caught up. Ryan waved. "Mark, you made it." Claire hugged Emily warmly, already talking about the drive and the view. Daniel gave a casual smile, lifting his sunglasses. "Looks like we picked the right weekend." Emily looked at Mark, waiting for an explanation that came too late. "Surprise," Mark said, his voice light. "I thought it would be fun with friends." Emily forced a smile. She told herself it was fine. Friends meant energy, energy meant less pressure. Maybe Mark thought that would help. Maybe he thought it would take the weight off their quiet problems. But as they walked toward the beach house together, Emily felt something settle in her stomach. This wasn't the surprise she had imagined during all those lonely evenings. This wasn't the space she had hoped for. The house was beautiful, wide windows, pale wood floors, and a deck that looked straight out to the sea. Everyone moved in quickly, choosing rooms, opening bags, filling the space with sound. Ryan talked about surf conditions. Claire planned dinners. Daniel claimed the couch and joked about sleeping there. Mark fit right in, laughing easily, telling stories Emily had heard years ago but hadn't heard in a long time. She watched him from across the room and felt a quiet distance grow. That night, they cooked together. Emily chopped vegetables while conversations flowed around her. She smiled when someone looked her way. She laughed at the right moments. She told herself she was being dramatic. It was only the first night. But when she stepped onto the deck alone, the ocean wind cool against her skin, the feeling returned. This trip wasn't about them. It was about everyone else. Mark joined her later, wrapping his jacket tighter. "Isn't it perfect?" he said. "It's beautiful," Emily replied, and meant it. He kissed her temple, quick and light. "I knew you'd like it." She wanted to say something then. She wanted to tell him she had hoped for quiet, for closeness, for a chance to talk without an audience. But the words stayed trapped. She didn't want to sound ungrateful. She didn't want to ruin the mood, so she nodded and went back inside. The next day moved fast. Breakfast, plans, beach walks, shared jokes. Emily stayed close to the group, but she felt like she was watching herself from a distance. Mark walked beside Ryan most of the time, deep in conversation. When Emily tried to catch his eye, he smiled, but it felt brief. Distracted, they visited small shops, took photos, and stood at lookout points where the view stole everyone's breath. Emily smiled in pictures, her arm around Mark's waist. But she felt stiff, like she was holding a pose instead of a feeling. In the afternoon, the group split up. Ryan and Claire went kayaking. Mark joined them without hesitation. Daniel stayed back, saying he needed rest. Emily almost followed Mark, then stopped. She told herself she needed air. She walked along the shore alone, shoes in hand, letting the water touch her feet. The rhythm of the waves calmed her. But it also gave her space to think. She realized how long it had been since Mark had planned something just for her. Not because he didn't care, but because life had taken over. Work, routines, habits, they had grown comfortable, and comfort had quietly turned into distance. When she returned to the house, Daniel was on the deck reading. He looked up and smiled politely. "Good walk." "Yes," Emily said. "I needed it." He nodded, understanding without asking questions. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the ocean filling the space between them. It was an easy silence, not heavy, not demanding. That surprised her, that evening. After dinner, the group played music and shared drinks. Mark laughed loudly, telling stories about college trips and old mistakes. Emily listened, noticing how animated he was, how alive. It hurt more than she expected. Later, when everyone went to bed, Emily and Mark lay side by side. The room dark except for moonlight through the window. "Did you have fun today?" Mark asked. "Yes," Emily said. The word felt thin. Mark turned onto his side. "I thought this would help us relax." Emily stared at the ceiling. "I thought this was for us." There was a pause. Mark sighed. "I didn't want it to feel heavy. I didn't want pressure." Emily turned to face him. "I didn't want pressure either. I wanted honesty." Mark didn't answer right away. "I thought you'd tell me if you didn't like it." "I'm telling you now." The silence stretched. Not angry, but tired. "I'm trying," Mark said finally. "I know," Emily replied, and that was the problem. Trying wasn't the same as understanding. The next morning, Emily woke early. She made coffee and sat by the window, watching the sky change color. Her thoughts moved quickly now, no longer gentle. She wondered how they had reached this point without noticing. She wondered if love could quietly fade without anyone doing anything wrong. When the others woke, the day moved forward again. Plans were made, smiles were shared. Life continued, but Emily felt something shift inside her. She stopped waiting for Mark to notice. She stopped hoping the trip would magically fix things. Instead, she observed, she listened, she paid attention, she noticed how easily Mark leaned into old friendships. She noticed how rarely he checked in with her. She noticed how natural it felt to step back. That afternoon, as they stood on the cliffs watching the waves crash far below, Emily realized something clearly for the first time. This vacation wasn't breaking her heart, it was showing her the cracks that had already been there, and as the wind moved through her hair and the ocean roared beneath them, Emily understood that whatever came next would not be simple. The surprise was over. The truth had arrived. Emily woke to the soft light of morning spilling across the beach house. The group had already started moving, voices, laughter, the clatter of coffee cups. She stayed in bed a moment longer, letting the warmth of the sheets hold her while the world outside came to life. The night had been quiet, but sleep hadn't erased the tension she felt. She knew the trip was supposed to bring them closer, but the space between her and Mark seemed larger now than ever. She felt a quiet urgency, a need to understand not just him, but herself, by the time breakfast arrived. Emily had dressed and walked out onto the deck, coffee in hand. The sun reflected off the waves, sparkling like tiny stars. Mark was already there, talking to Ryan about some surfing plan. Claire joined in, laughter spilling into the morning air. Emily smiled politely, nodding along, but she felt like an observer rather than a participant. Daniel sat at the far end of the deck, quiet, sipping his tea. He caught her eye and gave a small nod. Something about his calm presence made her feel less alone, even in a room full of people. The day moved fast. They visited a lighthouse first, the cliffs sharp and breathtaking. Everyone took turns taking photos, sharing jokes, pointing at the crashing waves below. Emily laughed when asked to pose for pictures, but her smile felt measured. She noticed how Mark interacted with the others, how easily he laughed and joked, how comfortable he seemed. She loved him, of course, but watching him this way reminded her of the distance that had grown between them. The way intimacy had been replaced by routine afterward. They went to a small cafe in the town, sitting outside under a canopy of vines. Conversations flowed around her, snippets of stories and memories she didn't know. Emily listened, occasionally adding a word or two, but mostly watching. Daniel sat beside her when a chair was free. He asked about the scenery, about her interests, about things Mark often didn't notice anymore. She answered, hesitating at first, then relaxing. His questions weren't heavy, weren't prying, they were gentle, curious, observant. She felt seen in a way she hadn't felt recently. Back at the beach house, the afternoon sun was strong and warm. The others went out kayaking, Ryan and Mark leading the way. Emily hesitated, but then chose to walk along the shoreline alone. Shoes in hand, feet sinking into the wet sand, she let the water lap at her toes. The rhythm of the waves calmed her, and for a moment the frustration, longing, and worry melted into a quiet awareness. She had loved Mark deeply, but the trip had exposed how much had been unspoken, how much had been ignored. She realized that love wasn't just about being together, it was about noticing, understanding, caring in ways that weren't always obvious. When she returned to the house, Daniel was sitting on the deck again, reading. He looked up, smiled, and asked how her walk had been. She felt a warmth at the simplicity of the question. They talked quietly, the ocean carrying their words softly. She found herself admitting feelings she hadn't yet confronted, how disconnected. She had felt how lonely she sometimes was, even when he was beside her. Daniel listened, nodding without judgment. His presence was comforting. A reminder that not all attention had to be complicated or demanding. As the evening arrived, the group gathered for dinner, sharing wine, stories, and music. Mark laughed freely, animated and easy, his energy contagious. Emily watched, noting the ease with which he interacted with friends. It was endearing, but it also highlighted what she missed in their own relationship: tension, shared moments, the small acts of noticing. She realized that happiness in one space didn't automatically extend to another. After everyone went to bed, Emily found herself awake, sitting on the deck in the cool night air. The stars reflected in the water, the waves rolling steadily beneath. Mark joined her later, leaning against the railing, looking out at the dark ocean. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She finally asked the question that had been on her mind since the trip began. "Are you happy?" Mark hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I was making things better," he said. Emily turned to face him, searching for honesty. "I think you were trying," she said softly, "but trying isn't the same as understanding." He looked at her, eyes wide in the dim light, and she saw uncertainty there. She realized he hadn't intended to hurt her. He thought laughter, surprises, and shared fun would fix what was missing. But she felt unseen. She felt that for the first time in months, maybe years. She needed more than effort. She needed presence, attention, care that wasn't shared with anyone else. The next morning, Emily woke early again, deciding to take a long walk before the others stirred. She felt a growing clarity. This vacation hadn't ruined anything. It had shown her what had been hidden in plain sight. Love was still there, but so was distance. Trust was there, but also assumptions. She had to understand what she truly needed and what she could accept. Walking along the beach, she thought about the people around her. Mark's friends were kind and fun, but their presence had highlighted what was missing between her and Mark. Daniel had been different, not intrusive, not flirtatious, just present. He hadn't crossed any line, hadn't tried to change anything, but he had reminded her that attention, care, and simple understanding could exist without effort or expectation. She realized that human connection wasn't about perfection. It was about noticing and responding to the other person. Back at the house, The day continued with small excursions shopping, exploring hidden trails, and sitting by the water. Emily moved through each moment, attentive and present, observing, listening, and thinking. Mark continued his easy camaraderie with the group, sometimes glancing at her with a smile. She felt a complicated mix of love and longing. She wanted to be close to him, to share everything again, but she also wanted him to see her fully. Without distraction, without the safety net of friends, by evening, the group gathered for their final dinner before the trip ended. Conversation flowed easily, but Emily's mind wandered. She noticed how quickly the day had passed, how the patterns of connection had played out. Mark laughed at a joke from Ryan. Claire shared a funny story. Daniel and Emily sat slightly apart, quietly observing the space between them filled with ease. She realized that while the trip had been intended to bring them closer, it had instead shown her the reality of their relationship. Distance didn't always come from conflict. It could come from comfort, from routine, from a failure too. Noticed. After dinner, Emily and Mark walked along the cliffs one last time. The wind was strong, the waves loud, the ocean dark. She looked at him, searching his face for signs of awareness. "This trip," she said quietly, "it wasn't what I expected. Not bad, just different." Mark nodded, voice low. "I wanted to make things better. I didn't know it would feel like this." Emily smiled faintly, feeling the weight of unspoken truths. "Trying isn't enough sometimes," she said. "Sometimes you have to see someone, really see them." Mark's gaze softened. He reached for her hand, tentative, as though asking permission to close the space. She took it, letting her fingers rest in his, not tight, not forced. It was a beginning, not a conclusion. The trip ended quietly the next morning. Bags were packed, hugs exchanged, the group dispersing back to their lives. Emily and Mark drove home, the car filled with a different kind of silence, one that wasn't empty but reflective. She thought about what she had learned, that love required attention, that happiness shared wasn't always happiness experienced, and that connection needed effort beyond surface gestures. By the time they returned home, Emily felt a sense of clarity. The vacation had not fixed everything, but it had revealed what needed attention. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They would need conversations, patience, and honesty. But she also knew that seeing each other clearly, even when it hurt, was the first step toward something real. Mark glanced at her as they unpacked. "I want to do better," he said. Emily nodded. "So I." And in that quiet exchange, filled with both hope and recognition, she realized that love wasn't about perfection, surprises, or grand gestures. It was about noticing, listening, and choosing to be present every day, even when it was hard. The ocean, the cliffs, the laughter of friends, and the gentle presence of someone who simply listened had taught her that the vacation had ended, but the lessons remained. The real journey wasn't the road they had traveled to get there, was the one they would now have to travel together. Emily didn't know exactly what would happen next. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and quiet disappointments. But for the first time in months, she felt ready to face them. The space between them was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was waiting to be bridged. And that, she realized, was exactly what love was. An ongoing effort, a willingness to see, to be seen, and to keep trying, even when the road was unclear and the waves crashed hard.